Kash Patel thought he landed a knockout blow on national TV, but Jasmine Crockett didn't fight back with words. She responded with something far more powerful, and it left Kash scrambling. The email hit Jasmine Crockett's inbox at 8:03 a.m. Subject line: Panel invite, Live National Roundtable. Security, accountability, the future of governance. She skimmed it once. Then again, 3 confirmed names. One stood out: Kash Patel. Her comms director, Brianna, walked into the office just as Jasmine was reading it a third time. Jaw set, eyes still. "You saw it?" Jasmine asked. Brianna nodded, holding a printed copy. "They're not looking for nuance. They're looking for spectacle." She dropped the paper on Jasmine's desk. "It's a trap. He's not just combative, he's calculated. This won't be a debate. It's bait." Jasmine didn't blink. She was used to these setups, the polite invitations wrapped in strategy, the stacked panels disguised as fair dialogue, the loaded questions designed to rattle, not reveal. But this one was different. Patel didn't just want a disagreement. He wanted a headline. "He thinks I'm here to react," Jasmine said finally, leaning back in her chair. Brianna folded her arms. "You're not going, right?" "I'm going," Jasmine replied, eyes steady now. "But not to play his game. I'm bringing my own." The goal wasn't defense. It wasn't a rebuttal. It was repositioning. Let him reach for the mic first. Let him swing with confidence. Because when the air cleared, Jasmine wouldn't be the one gasping. She had no interest in being the viral clapback. She didn't need to win the room in the moment. That wasn't power. That was performance. And Patel? He was counting on performance. Jasmine pulled out a legal pad from her desk drawer, flipped to a blank page, and began outlining not a speech, but a strategy. One grounded, in fact, built on precedent, anchored in policy she'd already pushed through while others played pundit. Brianna hovered by the door. "You sure about this?" Jasmine didn't look up. "I don't go into their house to burn it down. I go in to remind them the floor is uneven." The reply wasn't for effect. It was a reminder for herself. The invitation had been extended like a dare, and Jasmine had just accepted it not as a guest, but as a storm coming in silent. Kash Patel showed up early, not out of professionalism but control. He liked to walk the studio before lights were hot, while the crew still moved cables and tested levels. It made him feel like he owned the place, like he was setting the tone. He nodded at the moderator, offered a smooth joke to the production assistant, and slid into his chair like it was built for him. A navy suit, perfectly tailored. No tie. Casual power. The segment producer handed him the rundown. He didn't glance at it. "I don't need the script," he said. "I already know how this goes." Off camera, in the green room, he'd been louder. Leaning back in the leather chair, water bottle untouched, legs crossed. "We're going to catch her slipping," he said to his aide, grinning. "Crockett's sharp, but she folds when pushed. She gets righteous." The audience zones out. The aide laughed, half nervous. Kash didn't notice. He'd prepped not with data, but sound bites, a handful of quips, a few clipped headlines. He circled buzzwords on a notepad, soft on security, performative outrage, moral grandstanding. He didn't need to be accurate. He needed to be confident. The goal wasn't clarity. It was dominance. Kash had made a career out of playing chess with people who didn't realize they were in a game until checkmate. He knew how to bait, how to escalate, how to twist. "She'll try to pivot to policy," he said, smirking. "I'll bring it back to credibility." He practiced the line twice, then leaned back, satisfied. But what Kash didn't realize, what he never seemed to learn, was that not everyone enters the ring to throw punches. Some enter to turn the ring into a courtroom. He was preparing for a fight. She was preparing a record. And while he imagined her scrambling for responses, flipping through cue cards, breathing heavy, Jasmine was already sitting calmly in a different room, highlighting her notes with surgical steadiness. She wasn't flinching. She was filing. Because while Kash Patel sharpened his quips, rehearsed his smirk, and envisioned the applause, he still hadn't grasped the truth. You don't clap back at silence. You answer it, and sometimes that answer rewrites the whole script. And Kash? He wasn't ready for that kind of rewrite. The studio was colder than expected. Not the temperature, the energy. Stage lights buzzed overhead. The air held that artificial calm only television could produce, where people smile too wide and sit too straight. A row of interns hovered off stage, earpieces crackling. Someone adjusted a mic. The countdown began. Jasmine took her seat. To her left, Kash Patel already leaned forward, fingers steepled like he was 5 moves in. The moderator welcomed the viewers, her voice smooth, neutral, practiced neutrality. But the questions weren't. Let's begin with the emotional tone of recent national debates. Some say passion is overtaking practical leadership. Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe lived experience is enough to shape national security policy? That was the third question, only the third. And Jasmine heard it, not just the words, but the weight behind them. Emotion, passion, lived experience. It was the language of dismissal, dressed up in politeness. She'd heard it before on panels, in hearings, in passing comments that didn't land until hours later. The soft framing that asked her to explain herself before she was even allowed to speak. But she didn't flinch. She studied. The kind of stillness people mistake for passivity, until it turns into precision. Her hands stayed folded, her shoulders relaxed, her expression unreadable. But in her mind, the map was already forming. She wasn't reacting, she was collecting. Patel, meanwhile, was loving it. Every question that slid just a little closer to his comfort zone made him lean in further. He thought this was home turf. The phrasing, the pacing, all built for the kind of rhetorical ambushes he specialized in. He was winning the room, in his mind. Earning nods with smirks, eye rolls with punchlines. Every time Jasmine didn't speak, he took it as a point. She hasn't countered yet, he thought. She's behind. He didn't see it. Didn't see how every time she blinked slowly instead of interrupting, or tilted her head instead of frowning, she was stacking her own momentum. Didn't notice that the moderator's questions were starting to bounce off. Didn't realize the room wasn't tensing anymore. It was waiting. Because something was coming. Not louder, but heavier. And Jasmine? She was already centered in it. It came at the 12-minute mark. Kash had been circling, threading in digs under the guise of commentary. But now he stepped forward, both hands on the table, leaned in. With all due respect, Congresswoman, he said, drawing out the phrase like a formality. You're good at sound bites, but this is national security, not a podcast. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Not loud, not joyful, the awkward kind, where people laugh not because it's funny, but because they think they're supposed to. Jasmine didn't smile. He wasn't done. You talk well, Patel added, turning his gaze fully on her now. But that doesn't mean you're equipped for this space. We're talking global risk, classified intel, counter-terrorism strategy, not feelings and slogans. The moderator's mouth twitched, caught between stepping in and letting the drama breathe. The producers backstage said nothing. This was the moment they'd built the segment for. Kash was rolling now, listing credentials, dropping committee acronyms, recounting his time under the Trump administration like it was scripture, layering his points just enough to imply Jasmine was out of her depth without saying the words outright. She's not serious, he was saying without saying it. She doesn't belong here. And Jasmine? She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise a brow. She didn't shift in her seat or press her lips or offer even a flicker of visible tension. She just breathed. Long, slow. In through the nose, out through the thought. Because this was the moment they all thought would break her. But Jasmine knew better. Let them laugh. Let them think stillness is weakness. Let them misread quiet as uncertainty. That was their mistake. Always had been. The fire inside her didn't roar. It smoldered. It didn't demand attention. It waited for timing. Let Kash fill the air with his resume. Let him stack assumptions like cards. Because he didn't realize. She had already read his hand. He'd thrown the first punch, loud, clumsy, overconfident. Jasmine had no need to swing back yet. Not when she was still sharpening the blade. Not when the next move wouldn't be loud. It would be lasting. The moderator finally turned to her. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? The room exhaled. Even the lights seemed to wait. Jasmine didn't rush. She adjusted the mic just slightly, not for volume, but presence. Then spoke not with bite, but with balance. Since we're talking credentials, she said calmly, let's talk receipts. No snark, no fire, just weight, measured, inevitable. She didn't counter with titles, she brought the record. Patel had cited his role in a classified briefing on cyber threats. Jasmine responded by referencing the House oversight hearing on federal infrastructure vulnerabilities where Patel hadn't shown, but she had questioned every witness on gaps in state-level protocols. He'd named a report. She named 2, both published in the past 18 months, both publicly accessible. both contradicting the core of his claim that current oversight mechanisms were sufficient. She pulled out specifics: page numbers, vote counts, line items from bipartisan legislation Patel claimed never got off the ground, one of which, it turned out, had already been enacted as part of an omnibus package last December. You referenced the Domestic Cybersecurity Amendments Act, Jasmine continued, her voice steady as a courtroom transcript, but failed to mention that 3 of your own recommendations were removed because they duplicated existing frameworks that you apparently forgot to read. A beat. No gasp, no dramatics. Just a subtle shift in the audience. Heads tilted, eyes narrowed, not in confusion and realization. She didn't glance at Patel. Didn't need to. Because with each statement, she wasn't arguing, she was testifying. And the room wasn't being entertained. It was being informed. Even the moderator stopped fiddling with her notes. She was listening now. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't accelerate. She simply built fact upon fact, case upon case, like bricks laid in a foundation Patel didn't even realize she was constructing beneath him. And when she paused just briefly, the silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. Waiting. Expecting the swing that would never come. Because the moment wasn't about rage. It was about the elegance of precision. And Jasmine? She'd just shifted the room without raising her voice once. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Not enough to challenge, just enough to claim space. Her tone didn't change. Her hands didn't move. But what she said next cracked the air open. You came here for a headline, she said, voice low and level. I came with the homework. That's the difference. A murmur rippled through the studio, the kind of sound that follows a truth too sharp to dodge. Not applause, not laughter. Recognition. The moderator blinked, unsure whether to interject or let it ride. She stayed silent. It was the right choice. Patel tried to speak, leaned forward, mouth open, one finger raised. Jasmine held up her hand. Let me finish. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even defiance. It was clarity, plain and unshaken. Patel, mid-motion, froze. Something in his posture shifted barely, but enough. A falter. A pause where certainty used to live. And Jasmine kept going. She didn't swing at him. She spoke around him. Over the noise, through the rhetoric, past the theater. We're talking about the safety of this country, she said. Not just from external threats, but from internal negligence. From people who mistake sound bites for solutions. A brief scan of the crowd. Eyes locked. No one checked their phone. No one whispered. The room was still, and Jasmine filled it not by speaking louder, but by speaking without flinch. Patel looked like a man who had stepped into his own ambush. Because that's the thing about trying to provoke someone whose weapon is discipline. They don't play defense, they draw boundaries. And boundaries, when spoken clearly enough, become mirrors. The camera didn't cut away. The control room, sensing the gravity of the moment, kept it live, uninterrupted. They knew what they had. A moment too rare to script and too real to fake. When Jasmine finally stopped speaking, she didn't look to the crowd. She just sat back, quiet, centered. And in that silence, something irreversible had landed. It wasn't just a clapback, it was a reframing. She didn't win because she shouted. She won because she didn't need to. And Patel? He was still looking for the moment to jump in. He didn't realize the moment had already passed. The clip went live before the credits even rolled. 15 seconds. No cutaways, no overlays. Just Jasmine Crockett, calm and centered, saying, You came here for a headline. I came with the homework. That's the difference. The internet didn't just notice. It detonated. Within minutes, it was on X, then TikTok, then LinkedIn. Yes, even LinkedIn. Someone added music. Someone else turned it into a split-screen comparison, Jasmine's precision against Patel's sputtering reaction. By the top of the hour, the phrase was already a trending hashtag. Came with the homework. Patel's team scrambled. His aide called 3 conservative influencers, asking them to contextualize the exchange. Another drafted a blog post blaming media editing tricks and liberal echo chambers. None of it landed. Because there was nothing to twist. The full segment was available. The footage spoke for itself. No edits, no spin, just a woman refusing to shrink, and a man who didn't see it coming. Commentators tried to throw shade, calling Jasmine too rehearsed, too composed. One even said she weaponized calm, a phrase that got clowned into oblivion by Sunrise. Meanwhile, academics clipped the full 4-minute breakdown. Legal Twitter highlighted her case citations. Students reposted it with captions like, "This is how you respond when they come at your credentials." Patel's usual allies offered soft support but avoided quoting him directly. Even they knew the optics were off. Because it wasn't just the line, it was the control. The way Jasmine didn't interrupt, didn't escalate, didn't flinch. She let the moment bloom, and when it did, she owned it without needing to spike the ball. What Kash had wanted was a brawl. What he got was a lesson. And what the world saw was how strategy moves when it's not shouting. By midnight, the clip had racked up over 6 million views. Someone printed the quote on a hoodie. Someone else made a graphic of Jasmine with a crown she reposted neither. Because while the internet kept looping the moment, Jasmine had already moved past it. She didn't need to trend. She needed to legislate. And Patel? He was still trying to explain what just happened. The next morning, Patel went on offense. He appeared on a right-wing radio show before sunrise, voice tight, phrases practiced. "I'm all for strong debate," he said. "But when people reduce national security to sound bites and play identity politics for applause, well, that's not leadership. That's performance." He didn't say Jasmine's name. He didn't have to. The host nodded along, teed him up for another swipe. Patel leaned into it, trying to paint the exchange as a setup, as political theater, as a distraction. But while he talked, Jasmine was already back in D.C. Her team issued no rebuttal, no media blitz, no fiery tweets. Just a simple press release titled, "Bipartisan Bill, Introduced, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection Act." It outlined real numbers, budget lines, cross-aisle co-sponsors, a timeline for implementation. Buried in paragraph 4, a quiet footnote. This legislation builds upon prior recommendations from the 2022 House Oversight Committee report, co-authored by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. No mention of Patel. But everyone knew. The same cybersecurity issue he'd fumbled on live TV? She'd already written a solution for it. Policy over performance. Again. And just like that, the media cycle shifted. Cable shows opened with side-by-side headlines. Patel accuses versus Crockett introduces. The contrast was surgical. Commentators tried to bait her onto their shows. Panels offered prime slots. Influencers tweeted open invitations. She declined them all. Congresswoman Crockett isn't scheduling interviews this week, her comms director told reporters. She's working. The restraint baffled some. You've got momentum, why not ride it? But Jasmine wasn't chasing airtime. She was building something slower, something that would outlive the hype. And Patel? He kept talking. Longer interviews, angrier soundbites, phrases like liberal fragility and emotional politics. But the more he said, the smaller he sounded. Because by now, the story wasn't about who clapped back. It was about who followed through. And Jasmine? She wasn't performing leadership. She was practicing it in committee rooms, on the floor, through the bills with her name on them. And the more they pushed her to react, the more obvious it became. She'd already answered, and they just hadn't recognized the power in her silence. The clip kept floating, not like a trend, like a reference. Something people brought up in side conversations, classroom debates, Monday morning briefings. By the second week, it had entered a different phase, no longer viral, but canonical. College students began quoting Jasmine in group chats and government seminars. Congressional staffers slipped her line into internal memos. Even a few quiet career analysts at the Pentagon used it to open a closed-door discussion on credibility in oversight. I came with the homework. It wasn't just a line anymore, it was a standard. At Georgetown Law, a professor introduced a new seminar, The Crockett Method: Strategic Presence in Political Spaces. Week 1 focused on tone, Week 2 on silence, Week 3 on receipts. The students didn't study how she clapped back. They studied when she didn't and why that mattered more. Meanwhile, Patel started fading. The podcast invites slowed. The radio spots got shorter. Pundits shifted their talking points. Even his defenders stopped quoting him directly, it was too risky. His name had become a pivot point in arguments, not a position. He blamed the media, blamed bias, blamed algorithms. But deep down, he knew what had happened. He'd walked into a room thinking he was the sharpest voice there. He left a footnote. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't repost the graphics. She didn't do the talk show tour. She kept working. On the Hill, her office was busier than ever, not because of noise, but because of policy. Colleagues who once sidelined her now asked for briefings. Analysts from opposing parties quietly requested her notes. Veterans groups reached out, not with demands, but with gratitude. She still wore the same blazer, still kept her notes handwritten, still showed up early to the committee rooms no one covered. Because the win wasn't the moment. It was the momentum. And the people watching, the ones who'd never raised their voices in a room or been told to sit still or watch their tone, they weren't just clapping anymore. They were organizing. Quiet wins don't make headlines, but they make history. And Jasmine Crockett was becoming proof of that, one unshouted victory at a time. It wasn't a conference. It wasn't a panel. It wasn't televised. Just a small town hall inside a library community room in Shreveport. Plastic chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, a corkboard filled with flyers for lost pets and GED programs. No cameras, no pundits, just people. Jasmine entered quietly, wearing flats, carrying a worn tote bag. She shook hands, hugged 3 grandmothers she remembered from last year's session, and sat down beside a local housing advocate with a printed spreadsheet. Halfway through, during open Q&A, a girl no older than 16 stood up, nervous, holding a notebook with stickers peeling off. She walked to Jasmine, paused, then handed it over. "I watched you on TV," she said, voice cracking slightly. "They didn't see it coming, but I did." Jasmine smiled. "Not big, just enough." "That's the point," she said. The room was still, no flashbulbs, no quotes for Twitter, just a shared silence that felt sacred. Later that night, back in her hotel, Jasmine opened the notebook. Inside, handwritten notes from the girl, full sentences, facts underlined, a doodle of a mic with the words, "Use it wisely," underneath. She closed the book and sat in the quiet. No applause, no hashtags. Just a slow, steady breath, the kind you take when something is working, even if the world hasn't caught up yet. She wasn't chasing the last word. She was planting better ones, the kind that don't need to echo to be remembered. And Patel? His name hadn't come up once at that town hall. Not in questions, not in whispers. He wasn't the story anymore. He was the setup. And Jasmine? She was the follow-through. The real Clapback wasn't a zinger. It wasn't loud. It didn't need a microphone. It showed up in legislation, in student notebooks, in a young girl's voice that didn't shake when she said, "I saw you." Because here's the truth. Clapbacks aren't always loud. Sometimes they come dressed in facts, delivered in calm, and land like truth. And when they do, they don't just end the moment. They start the movement. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.